Really a comprehensive introduction here that I'd like to give as well. Welcome, everybody. I'm sure there'll be others that are joining us over the next couple of minutes here, but it really is a pleasure to host today's special innovation grand rounds, a tenure talk. This is our new tradition that we're starting in CI Med. It's one that's being borrowed from some various campus departments across campus, but it's really about highlighting and celebrating the work and impact and contributions of our faculty role models, those that have really combined innovation with medicine to impact patients' lives and advance their fields of research. So today, Carle Illinois is pleased to host Dr. Paul Arnold for his tenure talk. This is to highlight his innovative thinking and many notable scholarly achievements in research, teaching, and clinical and professional service. Dr. Arnold's a neurosurgeon. He's also associate medical director of the Carle Neuroscience Institute. He's a clinical investigator with the Stevens Family Clinical Research Institute at Carle, a clinical professor in Carle, Illinois. He received his MD degree from the University of Illinois College of Medicine at Chicago and completed a residency in neurosurgery there. And then following this, he went on to complete a fellowship in spine surgery at Medical College of Wisconsin in Milwaukee. Dr. Arnold's research interests in general include spine degeneration, cervical spine surgery, big data, robotics, and navigation. But more specifically, his efforts have been focused on clinical outcomes in spine surgery, advancing new surgical techniques, the biomechanics of spinal implants, spinal cord injury, and really making significant contributions in each of these. He's been part of several multi-center international clinical trials that truly have changed the treatment of several common spine diseases. Also the acute management of spinal cord injury, classification of thoracolumbar and cervical fractures, and type 2 odontoid fractures in the elderly. He was a PI at the clinical sites for many of these large trials and was part of the steering committee for these large trials as well. So all of these have resulted in high impact seminal publications that have changed the field. Another area, as I mentioned, of scientific inquiry has been in the field of biomechanics and the assessment of these and improvement of these spinal implants. So Dr. Arnold's in the middle of a phase 2 STTR grant looking at these novel lumbar interbody fusion cages, and he's a co-founder and the chief medical officer of a startup company developing this device. And that's what we're going to hear more about very shortly here. In regard to his teaching and mentoring, Dr. Arnold says that he's truly committed to having a resident and medical student on nearly every one of his clinical papers or book chapters that he's written, and really allowing the learner to study in depth about the clinical topic, to understand the scientific method, to learn about how to present that data with clarity. Dr. Arnold's published over 150 papers and 30 book chapters that have been co-authored with medical students, undergraduates, and resident trainees, and he continues to do this type of mentoring here at Carle, Illinois as well with our students and residents. So Dr. Arnold's professional service clearly reflects his regard as a thought leader, as a key opinion leader among his peers. He's had multiple important roles in national organizations. He's newly being elected as president of the Lumbar Spine Research Society. He's on the educational committee of the Cervical Spine Research Society, as well as being a past board member, and is chairman of the North American Spine Society's Ethics Committee, as well as a member of its board of directors. As a member of the guideline committees for the Congress of Neurological Surgeons, he's also helped to rewrite the very guidelines for the management of thoracolumbar trauma. So truly somebody that's making this type of impact and change at the international level. He currently serves on the editorial boards of the journals Spine, Clinical Spine Surgery, the Spine Journal, Global Spine Journal, Surgical Neurology, and in fact, at one time, he was on the editorial board of every major spine journal in North America. So this is just a fraction of the contributions that Dr. Arnold has made in research, teaching, service, and innovation. But please join me in welcoming Dr. Arnold today as we hear more about these broad impacts and contributions he's made, not only to Carle, Illinois, but to his field and to society. And so with that, I'd like to turn the screen then over to Dr. Arnold.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Can everybody hear me? Are we ready to go here?
I believe so. Yep.
It's good. Thanks. So thanks, Steve, for that kind introduction. I wasn't prepared to hear all that stuff about me. But before I get started, I want to thank everybody who's helped me put this slide together, put this slideshow together. My sort of own personal board of directors or circle of trust: Tracy Wazalek, Patty Jones, Andrew Webb, Shannon Hacker, and May Vogel. I really want to thank the College of Medicine and the Champaign-Urbana community at large for allowing me to present my work for this. I'm very grateful for the opportunity. Let me start off by saying that I've come back to Champaign and been here for 2.5 years. I've had the pleasure of working in several projects with outstanding collaborators on the engineering campus, including in areas of robotics, navigation, AI, concussion, and of course, we're very excited for the arrival of the 7T and the ability to collaborate with researchers there. But this project, which I think is exactly what everybody had in mind when the new college, the Carle Illinois College of Medicine was designed, was the intersection of engineering and medicine and what the two of those disciplines could do as something greater than the sum of their parts in solving clinical problems. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. This project is, as I look back, is over 10 years old. And that's one of the first things I learned is that from concept of product to its actual development is a long and difficult and strange winding road to mix two 70 songs together, song titles together. And so that's what I'm going to talk about today. It doesn't mean for me to demean anything that's been going on here. I'm very grateful for all the opportunities here, but this is something that I think is very important to me, and we're hoping to bring to fruition in the next several years. So I'm going to talk about the clinical problem, product development, and how we decided to solve that, a proof of concept study, and how this led us to forming a corporation called Evoke Medical, and then leveraged that into an NIH grant, our second animal study, and then other stuff I learned along the way about forming a company, including having a business and commercialization strategy, a regulatory strategy, financial strategy, a marketing strategy, and then how to build for the future. So I'm going to start with an elevator pitch, which is one of the things we've put together recently. An elevator pitch is a presentation that's given over a short period of time that allows you to get your point or point of view across to someone you want to influence in the time it takes to ride up in an elevator and they get out of the elevator before you go, when they get off and you never see them again. And so we recently had the privilege, our company, the four of us had the privilege of presenting, giving an elevator pitch and receiving some feedback at an industry publication, Shark Tank kind of meeting. And so we had to put together an elevator pitch for that. So this is our elevator pitch, and then I'll tell you a little bit about me that maybe already too much has been said by Steve, but just a little bit more. And then I'll introduce the team and our concept and tell you the story of how we got to where we are in the last 10 years. So this is our elevator pitch.
I've experienced firsthand the devastating effects that back pain can have on a close friend or family member. What's worse is spinal fusion success rates significantly lag behind that of other common orthopedic procedures, and failed fusions are costing the healthcare system billions of dollars annually. So the existing technology in the market today and over the past 30 years has been inadequate to allow fusion to take place at an acceptable rate. When a fusion isn't successful, reoperation can have a disastrous effect on the patient physically, emotionally, and financially. With an experienced team of surgeons and biomechanical engineers, Evoke Medical has developed the next generation of smart spinal implants that leverage a 35-year clinical history of electrical stimulation to aid in the healing process. With every step the patient takes, our device uses mechanotransduction to amplify the body's natural ability to grow bone. Having an all-in-one inner-body fusion device that has a therapeutic aspect as well as a diagnostic tool to allow me to know when and if fusion is taking place has the potential to revolutionize my practice. Human-powered smart implants are the core of what we've created. the ability to self-generate usable power purely from human motion without the use of batteries or external braces is the real game changer. Harnessing this power opens the possibilities for addressing many of the unmet needs in the large, multi-billion-dollar spine and orthopedic markets. First, it addresses subpar spinal fusion rates by leveraging a long clinical history of bone healing electrical stimulation. Second, it can greatly improve the postoperative continuum of care by acting as a load sensor to allow for better treatment decisions. For the past 4.5 years, we have biotech bootstrapped by securing over $2 million in non-dilutive SBIR grant funding.
Through our phase 2 SBIR work, we've fully integrated and miniaturized our implants and just recently received very exciting results from our animal study showing significantly increased bone growth with our active implants. I have the honor of working with my advisor and Evoke co-founder Lisa Fries and the rest of the team to commercialize our technology. Lisa has been a pioneer in this field and has been awarded significant grant funding to create and translate technologies to help patients. To you, this might look like just another spinal implant, but to me, it represents someone returning to exploring with their families or being able to play with their grandkids. This is why I joined the Evoke team, so we can make a real difference.
As Ember mentioned, we've made significant progress and are gaining traction, but now is the time to level up. We've stayed lean and mean long enough, so we are raising a seed round of funding in order to build out the rest of our team, scale manufacturing for initial clinical use, and accomplish our de novo regulatory strategy. We are looking for great investors to partner with us to achieve our vision of improving lives and reducing healthcare costs. Build better bone with Evoke Medical.
So that was our elevator pitch. Just a little bit more about me. I didn't expect Steve to say so much about me. So I'm also an alum of the university and I published my first paper with Dr. Lowell Getz in the Department of Ecology, Ethology, and Evolution when I was an undergrad. The picture on the left there is me and my wife taken in our freshman year of college in her dorm room in Allen Hall. And we've been married coming up on 41 years this month. Which reminds me, I got to get her a gift. And on the right is me working as a concussion doctor for the NFL at a New England Patriots Kansas City Chiefs game a few years ago, and I got my picture taken with the New England Patriots owner. I published over 300 papers in the literature and what I think is a reasonably respectable H-index at this point in my career. I've also rotated off being on the board of directors of Spinex, which is another company that is farther along the road than we are and is spun out of the University of Kansas. So now that you've heard a little bit about me, I want everybody to meet the team. The four of us are the current members of Evoke Medical, which is a spin out of the University of Kansas. Lisa Fries and I are the original co-founders. She is now the professor and chairman of mechanical engineering at the University of Kansas. And we got together to start this company as an engineer and a physician. Along the way, when we got our NIH grant, the SBIR grant, we hired Lake LaPierre as our CEO, who's one of Lisa's former graduate students and had significant industry experience working for Biomed in the spine industry. And Ember Kretsch, who you also saw in our video, is one of Lisa's most recent graduate students. She got her PhD last year. She's a lead engineer and has been instrumental in helping us miniaturize the circuitry going into our cage. I'm very fortunate and grateful to work with such outstanding people, particularly Lisa. We've had a partnership for over 10 years, and it's been one of the highlights of my career. The pictures of in the lower level are advisors and consultants and people who've helped us along the way getting to where we are right now. So we also were told along the way that we have to have a explain of why you exist or what's your why or what our mission statement is. And this is what ours is. Evoke Medical is pioneering the generation of human-powered spinal implants that enhance the body's natural ability to heal and senses the postoperative fusion progression. So that's our mission statement. That's what we're trying to achieve. So the first thing I want to talk about in this is I want to define the clinical problem, and then discuss what our solution has been to date, just purely on a scientific basis before I get to the more non-scientific or business aspects of the startup. And I'll weave that into the story as we go, as it becomes relevant. So the first thing, how this happened, is that there was a call for proposals when I was at the University of Kansas. This is a partnership of funding between the University of Kansas and the Kauffman Center for Entrepreneurial Leadership. Ewing Kauffman had founded the center in Kansas City, and he was at one time the owner of the Kansas City Royals, and was very, he started up what became Merrill Dow and got bought out by Novartis. This was started as a chemical company in his garage, and so he was, very enthusiastic about promoting entrepreneurship in the Kansas City area. 7 proposals were initially funded. Only 2 of them are still standing, ours and another one for a bladder cancer drug, which is in development at the University of Kansas. So along with this funding that we were able to obtain when we pitched this idea to this startup board, was we were assigned a board of advisors to help us and guide us along the way. And they've been very helpful to some extent. And once we became our own company, they became less active and less helpful, but they were very helpful to just an engineer and a physician starting out the company, guiding us toward where we needed to go. And I'll get into that a little bit further along the way. So the clinical problem is that is back pain. It's the second most common reason for visiting a physician, and the amount of back pain in the world is increasing as the aging population, the baby boomers, people in my generation get older. There's almost a 50% fusion failure rate in lumbar spine fusion surgical procedures, particularly in patients who are high risk, which would include diabetics, smokers, patients that are immunocompromised and that are overweight. And this adds $6 or $7 billion annually to the cost of healthcare every year. And so this is something we want to try to mitigate against. If you look at this graph, there's a potentially 20% reoperation rate for spine fusion cases compared to a 10% reoperation rate in hip and knee revisions. And so this again contributes significantly to the high cost of healthcare in the United States. We have the highest GDP going to healthcare than any civilized country in the world, and anything that can be done to help alleviate suffering and reduce this cost, I think, would be welcome. And that's the potential clinical problem that we decided to attack with our implant. So the research that led to Evoke Medical started in the mid-2000s with the recognition of this huge need and the conception of a potential solution. So there are currently available adjunctive therapies to help the spine fuse. This would include DC electrical stimulation, which can either be implanted outside the body or inside with the only FDA-approved implantable bone growth stimulator. It's safe, but it can be offered. It's battery operated, so when the battery dies, its ability to enhance fusion dies with it. And there's, of course, the added cost. If it becomes infected, it has to be removed, which will require a second surgical procedure. There's a protein on the market, or a bone growth factor called Infuse, which has been licensed and developed by Medtronic, which is has the largest spine market in the world, which helps increase fusion rates. This is a genetically engineered bone growth factor, which has $1 billion annual revenue every year just as a single product. It grows bone very well, but like fire, can either warn you or burn down your house if you're not careful with it. So it can cause ectopic bone growth, and which can cause bone to grow outside the area where you want it to grow and potentially into the spinal canal, which could cause neurologic deficit or pain. There's some controversy about whether it increases the rates of cancer, and it adds a significant cost to the procedure, typically in the range of several $1,000s, depending on how much is used. Our solution to this would be a smart fusion cage that doesn't rely on any of this help achieve higher fusion rates in the patient. So again, here's the need. There's 700,000 spinal fusion procedures in the United States, a failure rate of anywhere from 10 to 40%. The rate of healing can be slow. There's a cadre of patients who may not be candidates for surgery because of the high risk of fusion failure. There are adjunctive therapies, as we mentioned, and our solution would be to provide bone healing with direct current electrical stimulation generated by the implant itself with no additional cost of adjunctive therapy. And all patients can have increased healing rates and decreased time to heal. So this is what we would propose to do conceptually, miniaturize that bone growth stimulator that's currently on the market, which produces DC electrical stimulation, put it into the cage, and then implant the cage the same way a surgeon would perform a procedure now. This would deliver DC electrical stimulation to the interbody space where it's needed the most and nowhere else. It would reduce surgery time with a single access procedure and decrease time to healing. There'd be no added on cost for adjunctive therapy, no implanted batteries, no second surgical site, no user compliance issues. There'd be no surgeon retraining or no new surgical instruments, and this is what I insisted on as part of my contribution to this, is that it should go in the same way that a surgeon puts in a cage now. The cage on the left looks a lot like the cages that are used now, and our goal was to miniaturize that bone growth, the stimulator, and its circuitry into the cage itself, which we think we've successfully been able to do. So these are some of the other adjuncts on the market in terms of using PEEK or titanium cages for biologics. They've gone back and forth without ever really coming up with an adequate reproducible solution to interbody lumbar fusion. So the idea of mechanotransduction in electrical stimulation is not a new one. It's a proven technology, and there's been over 100,000 of those bone growth stimulators implanted. There have been numerous advances in technology in recent years, including miniaturization of these. The positive effects of this DC clinical stimulation has been well documented, and Julius Wolff observed almost 100 years ago, bone remodeling can be induced by applying mechanical stress to the bone. At that time, research had not shown that the electrical charges are present in bone when a comprehensive or compressive tensile forces are applied. In vitro studies showed DC stimulation enhances osteoinductive bone morphogenic protein expression as well as increased pH, thereby creating a favorable environment for bone formation. And that's the theory behind what we were able to come up with. So the current standard of care right now is an interbody fusion cage filled with either allograft or autograft, which is the patient's own bone, and a posterior fixation. Some of the add-on therapies, as I mentioned, are these braces that have electromagnetic stimulation and an implantable battery. And again, these are the downsides of using those. These braces are bulky, they're often uncomfortable, and there's a low patient compliance. The bone growth stimulators that I mentioned require a second surgery, sometimes have to be removed, and they don't grow bone where it's needed most. They tend to grow it in the gutters of the spine rather than in the inner body space where the fusion tends to be more robust. They can get infected, they eventually stop working, and so they're not a perfect solution. And even though they're FDA approved, they're very uncommonly used in spine surgery today. So the first thing we heard from our board of advisors is once we were able to obtain funding initially from the University of the Kaufman Center, was you got to get some customer feedback. Is this a good idea at all? Why work on this if this isn't going to work or if nobody's going to think this is a good idea? So we got involved with the NSF Innovation Corps, and we went out to discuss this with several surgeons, over 30 in fact. Most of them were in Michigan when we did this. There was an overwhelming positive response. We had to educate them a little bit on what it meant for electrical stimulation, but once they understood the concept, it was like a light bulb went off, and they immediately understood the potential for increasing fusion in humans. Everybody agreed that animal studies and perhaps limited clinical trials would be required before this could become a broadly accepted part of the spine surgeon's toolbox. And so this is our technology solution. This is how we attempted to get electrical stimulation into the cage itself. And it started out as something very big and bulky that would not be acceptable for spine surgeons today. It's something that we think very closely mimics what's an interbody fusion cage today. So the current density that we would have in this would be in the range of normal bone current density production that goes on normally in patients' day-to-day life. This would involve using a predicate lumbar cage and translating Wolff's law of mechanical transduction into our own novel interbody cage, the Evoke Medical interbody cage. This would involve therapeutic targeted bone healing only at the site of where the bone growth is needed in the fusion. This would induce electrical stimulation only at the healing site while the patient was moving. So the kinetic energy generated by a person in motion would be translated into electrical current and stimulation, allowing bone growth to occur at the site. This would eventually be able to allow us then to introduce a sensor into the cage itself, which will allow us to measure loads on the cage and at the surgical site to allow us to know when fusion had occurred. So once the load was gone, there's no more load on the implant, you could safely assume that fusion had occurred. And again, so this was the value proposition we wanted to pitch, and this is what guided our work going forward along the way. This is what we wanted to accomplish in our work and then moving into a startup. We want to be able to expand the fusion market to the difficult to fuse patient and have improved outcomes and speed of fusion for everybody. We want to have a fully integrated design, which would increase surgeon adoption so they wouldn't have to learn a new technique. We wanted this to be human powered and no implanted batteries. Wanted to have reduced reliance on other adjunctive therapies, including expensive PMP, no external bracing required for activation and treatment. And then to have this be a platform technology where this could be translated to other clinical needs, including long bone fractures and the possibility of maybe even treating cancer with this. Someone has also approached Lisa, and I'm not sure about where this would go, but how this could increase the growth of oysters. And so I don't know much about that, but we're starting to think about or look into that and how that might translate as well from this technology. So again, this is the value proposition, and we would hope this leads to applications outside the spine. And this is how we generate several of our patents, so they would not be limited just for use in the spine. So we came up with the idea to use piezoelectric materials, and let me tell you a little bit about that. These convert mechanical loads to electrical signals. The most commonly used material is ceramic. They're typically brittle and used for high frequency load applications. The collagen fibrils of the bone exhibit piezoelectric responses to loading. But we wanted the standard piezoelectric material would probably be too brittle to function as a load-bearing construct. So we decided to use tough piezoelectric material for our implant. And a lot of this work was done in Lisa's lab over the course of 5 years with several of her graduate students who implemented some of these ideas and changes, and we've had step-by-step growth along the way as every grad student sort of added on to what was previously done. So the product concept would be the interbody implant itself would produce direct current electrical stimulation through the natural movement of the patient with no battery required and low current levels just at the area of the fusion. Piezo ceramic generators inside the implant, it is a load-bearing structural component of the implant. It's not a battery. It helps strengthen the implant, and it has to be electrically insulated, that is to say, not in contact with blood or any other fluids to function. And it has a miniaturized circuit, which was required to regulate the output. So we had to get all that into the inner workings of the cage. Inside the implant, the circuitry from the PZT, piezoelectric material, conditions the spine to generate negative current, which is transmitted from the stack through the miniaturized circuitry. This is then sent to an electrode mounted to the end of the implant. This current leads to accelerated and focused local bone growth. The current is the same level as in the body normally and is only produced when the body is in motion, that is to say, dynamically. The load is transmitted to the bone in the disc space. And as the bone grows, the load becomes less. This has, as I mentioned, ramifications for development of a load sensor, allowing the patient and physician to know the status of the fusion at any one time. If we can be able to get this onto an app on your phone, and would mitigate against the need for a lot of the x-rays that you are on the patients to assess fusion going, as the postoperative period goes on. So our composite produces electrical signals in response to dynamic forces again. It's tough and mechanically compatible with bone. Like I said, we got a patent granted, and again, this is another thing I learned along the way. We filed a patent in 2014, and we didn't get it till 2021. There's a lot of legal time and effort and hours spent trying to, write up the patent, and we had to review it several times, as well as a search to make sure we weren't infringing on any other patents that that already existed, and then for the patent office to take a look at this and agree that this is something novel. So we have one patent now. We have two others that are awaiting approval, and we're working on several others I'll get to later on in the talk. So again, the inner body implant itself produces the DC electrical stimulation to the natural movement of the patient. That's sort of the mantra for this implant. And these are a list of the papers, and all those first authors are some of Lisa's graduate students that have helped work with us, and so each one of them helps us make incremental progress along the way. So how the device works: when the implant works, it doesn't work. By that I mean, when it fully does the job, it stops working. There's no more load on the spine once the complete fusion has occurred. So as the fusion occurs, the bone will carry the load and shield the implant from the load. Without sufficient loading, the device is just a regular inner body implant. So there has to be loading to allow fusion to occur. And that's part of Wolff's law, that bone grows best under compression. So this has mechanically synced electrical stimulation. Without sufficient mechanical loading, that's to say the bone graft loaded in compression and dynamic moving, there's no supplemental current that's delivered. And then this would sort of default then just to a regular inner body bone graft or bone cage. It has a low duty cycle, that is to say it's mechanically synced pulse current. There's no voltage overload possible because the circuit caps the voltage output. So patients aren't going to get electrically shocked, or if they get struck by lightning, or nothing really bad's going to happen. So we made sure that. We had a hard time trying to convince the FDA that the first time we talked to them, and I'll get to that later on. But the current is very low, and so and it mimics what normally goes on in the human body. The negative DC pulse generated occurs upon mechanical loading, and we think that this inhibits sclerostin, because then the negative current pulse is in sync with the mechanical unloading, acts as a sclerostin inhibitor. And because of how quickly the bone heals or grows or fuses, the timing of this healing is, in our proof of concept study, which I'll get to in a minute, indicates a possible Wnt signaling pathway, which is different than a constant direct current process. And so we think that there's this pathway that's occurring that's allowing, that we're regulating or turning on, that allows the bone to grow. Again, this is the output for our bone healing stimulation with, and this is the circuit that we're trying to miniaturize the diagram of it in terms of optimizing the current load and the resistance and the impedance of the current in the body while this is functioning. So further work done in Lisa's lab with piezoelectric is how to stack these, and what the optimal amount of stacking is, and what the right size and shape and number generated in as part of the load bearing part of the implant. So a lot of this work was done. This is another paper that was done in Lisa's lab, and it turns out that 9 stack generators are the optimal amount for the appropriate resistance and impedance of the generator in the body that produces the optimal, not the most, but the optimal amount of current to grow the bone. And again, this is what the stack layer generator looks like. The electrical wiring is mechanically in series, but electrically in parallel. And this is the part that we're constantly refining with some of our collaborators to make standardize our interbody fusion. And again, this is what one of the prototypes eventually looked like. Now, this would not be something that would be acceptable that you would want to put in a patient. No surgeon is going to want to put this in with this wire coming out of the disc space and then the positive electrode implanted somewhere in the soft tissue. And no company would come anywhere near this. I mean, when we show this to them as a prototype, they'd be polite and say, yeah, that's interesting, but this is clearly, we have a ways to go from this. The electrical current would be direct, but not necessarily constant. The circuitry is designed to be on and off with maximum limits equivalent to the current density, approximately equal to the biomet that's in use, the biomet device that's in use now. The actual current is much lower because the electrode length is shorter. And the on-duty cycle depends on load frequency, the load magnitude, and the resistance between the electrodes, which is provided by the body. So this is, so once we came up with this concept and we demonstrated all this in the lab, you know, we have constant meetings with our advisors, and one of the guys of the group who was a successful radiology entrepreneur in Florida suggested to us, okay, you gotta get some animal data. This is what you want to have something to show people when you approach grant funding agencies and potential investors. You gotta have something to show them. There's gotta be some sizzle with all this. This is all this engineering stuff is great, but you know, what can you show what can you show people that how it works? So we came up with this, we were able to get a grant to come up with the first NIH grant. Was a $250,000 grant to come up with this prototype. We leveraged all the data from all those studies that I showed you before and came up with this prototype that we were going to put into some animals and get some data. You know, we wanted to get some animal data. So this is an encapsulated piezoelectric composite material with 9 stacked layers, an outer titanium electrode which delivers bone generating negative current, insulated wired to the positive titanium electrode embedded in soft tissue, and the signal conduction circuitry embedded in the insulating positive electrode. Well, this is a huge, bulky apparatus that we came up with, and our advisor said, just get some data and let's see what this looks like. And so, does this concept really work? So this is the prototype used for the proof of concept. So I went up to the Medtronic Physiological Research Lab, which is a privately run lab in Minneapolis, and I scrubbed in with the veterinarians, and we put 4 of these into sheep. There's an active and control in the same sheep. The active and control devices were of identical design. There was no posterior hardware because that may have contributed to the ability to get a fusion. We did have a buttress plate put in so that there was no migration of the implant. We used autograft in all the cages, inside all the cages. The hollow part of the cage has bone in it, and that's the part that sits between the vertebral bodies that allows the fusion to take place. We got 6-week CT scans. We sacrificed the animals at 4 months. We got 4-month CT scans and biomechanical testing and histological analysis. And this is what it looks like. So as you, I'll see if I can put an arrow on here. So you can see clearly the active area of the bone is much more robust growth of bone here. All this is new bone growth compared to the control levels. And you can see here that the bone growth respects the spinal canal. There's no ectopic bone growth in the spinal canal, which is a very important component of the findings of this study. This is what the CAT scans look like at 4 months. There's much more bone growth here at the active site here, as you can see here, compared to the control site here. There's some area that may have not fused right here, but clearly there's bone growth all the way across here at the active site. As you can see here, this is a very compelling slide here. This histograph on the right shows complete bone growth. All this purple is bone growth across the disc space, showing one solid block of bone. And here, there may be some pathologic bone that is not completely crossed the disc space and grown here. So this probably has some soft tissue in it, which is not conducive to attaining a fusion, which is what the goal of the study was. And so this is a very compelling slide from our point of view. We also did some biomechanical testing. The active specimens had lower range of motion and higher stiffness, which confirmed the findings of the histology and the CT scans. And this is some of the data from that. The active had much less range of motion, was much stiffer than the control levels. So this is what we thought was the influence. The sphere of influence is only 5 to 8 millimeters away from the electrode, which is good. That means bone is not going where you can't control it or where you don't want it. And again, if there was a BMP pathway to the bone, there would have only been a spot weld. But because there was more growth over there, we think this is due likely to the wind pathway, which is the theory that we're operating on right now, how this bone is growing. So this became a inflection point for us as a group, for Lisa and I as collaborators. We clearly demonstrated that there was a good that the proof of concept worked. We clearly couldn't put something this bulky into any kind of patients. We need to move this farther. And this is a time when we started fighting a little bit with the university. And Lisa and I then at this point decided, look, we're going to spin this out. We're going to spin the technology on the university. We formed a startup. This is when we became officially incorporated, when we realized that we need some other help. Lisa and I are both very busy full-time academics. We couldn't devote, the appropriate amount of time to the startup. And so what and to compete for an SBIR, you need to have a company, which is what we did. So after some acrimonious negotiations and discussion with the university, we finally decided to break off on our own and spun out the company that's now called Evoke. We finally got the university to understand that they put a lot of money into this, that if we fail, all that money's gone. But if we're successful, you'll be successful with us. So they finally sort of grudgingly agreed, with that thought process. And so we spun this out, and this is when we were able to leverage our data into $1.5 million NIH phase 2 grant. And this is when we hired Leighton to be our CEO, because there's clearly much more involved in terms of taking this beyond just Lisa's lab in Lawrence, Kansas. We wanted to potentially commercialize this idea and develop it. And so we needed more help. And so Leighton came on. He had significant industry and experience been a wonderful leader, and has been also was one of Lisa's graduate students, so she knew him very well. So we obtained this $1.5 million non-dilutive funding for 3 years. We're at the end, coming to the end of it. We have a no-cost extension, mostly because of COVID has waylaid some of our plans in the last year. We got a very good score from the NIH. It got funded the first time around. And this would allow us to miniaturize the circuitry, enter into contracts with other subcontractors, and allow us to do a much bigger animal study, all of which we've been able to accomplish in the last couple of years with this, despite COVID going on. So the goal, as you can see, is to miniaturize that prototype that was used in the proof of concept into something so small that would fit in the cage that the surgeon would have to think about when it was placed in the interbody space. So this required a progressive reduction in the footprint and its components, improved energy conversion efficiency, in a fully miniaturized circuit, which is what we were able to come up with. Lisa and I and Leighton didn't have the expertise to do this ourselves. And this is where this company called Cortec came in, and they were part of the grant writing process with us. And another thing I learned along the way in a startup is that just because you own half the company when you start doesn't mean you're going to have half the company when it's all said and done. And so Lisa and I gave up some of our shares to Leighton when he came out as our CEO. And as part of the deal to get Cortec on board, we had to give up some more shares to them. So Lisa and I's 50-50 shares been diluted somewhat, not dramatically so. And we're certainly happy to get Leighton and Cortec as part of this. But as we go, we're starting to feel the pain of what's going to happen when you talk to venture capitalists about how much control they want of the company and how much they want to take away of what you put 10 years into so far. And so that was a little eye-opening for me along the way. So Cortec is the only small to mid-sized company in the United States that we're able to find that offers a combination of both state-of-the-art advanced electronics research, design and modeling, and manufacturing, plus cutting-edge piezo device research, design, modeling, and manufacturing capabilities. And so we've met with them several times. They're a very integral part of our success right now, and a hugely important partner to us as we go ahead moving forward with this. So this would be an iterative process. Leighton and Emmer have spent a lot of time on this, miniaturizing the surgery. So Cortec understood what we needed. They got to work on it. They've been spending a lot of time, miniaturizing the process. They'd send us some prototypes. We'd work on it, try them out, test them biomechanically, send them back, tell them what more we needed, how to fix it, and what this would look like going forward. And so, like I said, they've been very helpful to us at somewhat of a cost to us, but it's sort of the price of doing business. So this is what we wanted to get to look like, and it looks pretty close to this right now. The technology take-home points that we imparted to Cortec going forward is it has to be the same size, shape, and outer materials and function as currently marked interbody implant. The piezoelectric stack has to be encapsulated and sealed and not in contact with body fluids to allow the creation of a current to occur. The current density output has to be in the range that is naturally produced by the body. In the event of an electrical failure, no current can be delivered, and therefore this would default into a standard interbody fusion cage. There has to be an automatic shutoff system built into the device function, and that's when fusion occurs. So Cortec and us all agreed that these would be sort of our guiding principles to try to make this work. And so I think we were able to do that. We decided to test this again on a sheep model once they were able to miniaturize this. And they did that, probably within a year and a half. And we use sheep because sheep is what has been studied in a lot of other different fusion models, and people are able therefore to compare results. And they have a lot of biomechanics that are compatible with human. And so I learned a lot about sheep biomechanics along the way. So part of our grant was to get a much bigger animal study, which we able to do. This is the study design again, kind of along the same way. We got in-life CT scans and radiographs at 6 and 10 weeks, which I'll show everybody. Post-mortem micro CT scan at 16 weeks. Biomechanical and histological testing. That still hasn't been done yet because we just finished this study just recently, and so we're waiting for all that to get done. We're in the process of doing the biomechanical testing, and then there'll be some histological analysis following that. So in the interim between the time we published or did the first proof of concept study and our study now, Lingley et al. Came out with this paper in the European Spine Journal, which sort of standardized how you measure sheep fusion, because this isn't something that we would normally come in contact with or have knowledge of. And so I had to learn about this because I was tasked to blindly assess, as the physician of the group, to blindly assess fusion as it went, in these animals. And as you can see at both the 6 and 10 week CT scan, the active sites had a much more robust fusion rate or amount of bone growth compared to the control levels. And so we're very optimistic about these findings. Again, here's some further findings. You can clearly see that in this study right here, the active has much more bone compared to the control. Again, this is another 6-week study. There's not too much bone growth going on here, but there's clearly more bone growth going on here in the active layer. These are at 10 weeks. There's very robust bone growth here in the active device compared to the control. And again, in 16-week post-mortem micro CT scans, there's much more active bone growth here compared to control here. There's clearly a solid fusion all the way across here. You don't really see that here. And again, the same thing in these studies, this specimen as well. So we're at the point now where we're going to analyze the biomechanical data and get some outside histological data. And so we think that we've been able to successfully miniaturize this, and we've shown it by putting these animals. We're ready. We think we're ready for our moment almost. And so there's some other issues that you have to think about, and that's what's your business plan. So we weren't, we're engineers and physicians. We didn't have a lot of experience with this, so we had some help along the way. You have to have a sort of a commercialization strategy. What do you do about your intellectual property? What's the regulatory environment like? How are you going to get paid for this? How's it going to get reimbursed? How are you going to manufacture it so it's standardized, it can be reproduced thousands of times, not just in Lisa's lab a few times so we can do some animal studies? How are we going to market this? How are we going to get third-party payers to pay for it? And how are we going to finance all this? We think some of this could be done through more NIH grants for manufacturing and testing, but we're at the point now where we're ready to take on some angel and venture financing for clinical trials and regulatory strategy, all of which we have consultants for that have been lined up as part of the grant. So the intellectual property, we think we got pretty well worked out. We've licensed it. We have exclusive license for it for platform technology from KU. We're looking at, we've been to the FDA once, and while it was a less than, warm and fuzzy meeting we had with them, at least it was enlightening and illuminating in terms of what we need to know sort of going forward. And we have, other plans as well about what's going on for regulatory. So the business part of this is that the spine market is huge. It's a $7 billion a year market for spine fusion, a little which we would like to eventually capture with our implant and potentially revolutionize the field. It has a compound annual growth rate of almost 3%. And this on the right's a graph showing which companies have the current market share for that. This was a timeline we put together with the help of our advisors. We're a little bit behind on that, probably due to COVID. We are at the seed round funding right now. We had almost $2 million from the NIH. And we've also, had people talk to us about exit strategies. Are we going to be acquired by a strategic partner or grow and become, someone who can help us? We have all the other aspects that you need to have a company in place, or are we going to try to grow this organically and become another big spine company? Again, if we were going to do that, we'd need much more investment in terms of human and financial capital to try to make that happen. So this is our marketing strategy. We think we could get a premium for the cage compared to other cages because of the engineered circuitry that's involved. But on the other side, we don't think you would need any BMP or stem cells or bone growth stimulators or any batteries or anything else, which would significantly save in the cost of surgery, perhaps reducing each procedure by 25% and decreasing the amount of revisions that would be required overall. This was revenue projection, and these were only guesses, and these were done several years ago, and they probably don't apply, but at least we were made aware of them. If you look at the arrow on the bottom part, we're in the mid session right there where we think we're ready to start an IDE. We need to really firm up our regulatory strategy because we have to go to the FDA with that, and I'll get to that in a minute. And we significantly de-risked the technology so far, and this is what we've been told we need to do by companies we want to get acquired. They're really not interested in buying something that early with unproven technology. But if you can de-risk the technology going along, some companies are willing to pay a premium for it. So that's certainly something we're hoping for. So these are some of the projections for seed fundings, and I'll skip over that because we're in the early stages of talking to investors about this. This is some of the future plans we have, and I'll get to this. I'll summarize this again. One of them is to again put a sensor in the implant to let us know when a fusion has occurred. The other is because we think this is a platform technology. We think this might lead to enhanced bone healing, potentially long bone fractures. Again, this is a not as big a market as it is for spine, but certainly not negligible. Something we don't want to ignore. There might be some application with the Department of Defense in terms of blast injuries or military injuries that tend to be worse than civilian injuries. We've submitted grants for both of them right now. Layton's the lead for the spinal sensor, and Ember is the one for the iron rod. And again, we extensively use Cortec as a subcontractor in helping us develop it. So then we have a regulatory strategy, which is sort of the least completely formed right now. What I didn't know is that there's a whole myriad of ways, traps and mazes that you have to get through the FDA to try to get your product approved. Our product, because there's some risk to it, would fall into probably a class 3 device. It's the FDA told us it's not sufficiently close, or it doesn't sufficiently resemble a product on the market where there's a predicate device and we can go through a standard 510K. So we're looking at now through all the machinations and all the thought process put into a de novo strategy, where this would be a completely new device on the market. It's a tougher hill to climb, but there's more benefits to it at the end. And so again, we had a meeting with them which didn't suggest it was a traditional 510K. We think that the primary function is inner body stabilization with a secondary function of low pulse electrical stimulation in the physiologic range. We're going to apply for the FDA breakthrough device designation, which I'll tell you about in a second, and a de novo pre-sub with a risk-based approach with data and established special protocols, which we would establish. Well, again, this is our, well, compared to the bone growth stimulator on the market right now, the one on the left, which is ours, it has a primary mode of action is mechanical and only a secondary mode of action, which is electrical. There's no battery powered, and it has biologically equivalent stimulation. It's only on when the patient is moving, as opposed to constant current from the biomet device. The FDA is showing active interest in smart devices and promoting new regulatory pathways. They've come up with a breakthrough device program, which is what we're very interested in. Now, this would not make it any easier to get through the FDA, but it would dramatically shorten the timetable it would take to get through that. They approved the first spine de novo device this year, or last year, this IntelliRod, which has a strain sensor built into the rod, not anything electrical, but certainly some sensor modalities, which is what we're interested in. And in 2018, they approved the first orthopedic de novo device. So there's some precedent for this, and we're encouraged by this. Again, this is how we position with the FDA as a primary and secondary function. And again, the primary and secondary function would all be encased in one cage that looks exactly like the cages that are commercially available right now. This would be a de novo pre-sub submission with a full-on risk approach. This would be an Evoke device mitigation via detailed engineering technical rationales and draft performance testing protocols. We would define the product category favorable to our technology, which would be called an intervertebral fusion device, load-induced pulse bone growth stimulator. We would define the specific controls and performance criteria through our unique testing methods and acceptance criteria. And we would have a competitive advantage by test method trade secret, which would be only, you'd only be able to know that through our patent portfolio and through, like sort of like Kentucky Fried Chicken, the 11 herbs and spices in there that we've sort of figured out along the way. We think there's also the potential for secondary market, and that is to say long bone fracture healing, which I mentioned before. I'm starting to bump up against the hour, so I'll try to wrap this up. The long bone fracture market is not as big as the fusion market, but certainly not negligible and not worth ignoring, particularly since we think this is a platform technology and it already exists, so we can just translate into long bone fractures. Again, here's some market data that we've been provided that has helped us decide whether we should do this or not. And so we're pretty far down the path of doing that within the purview of Evoke Medical. We have 3 grant proposals in right now, 2 of which are being reviewed this month. The 2 on the bottom are the ones I've already discussed. The one on the top is an NIH commercialization readiness pilot program, phase 2 supplemental grant. We got some good, but not over the scoring line funding and comments the first time. So we're going to resubmit this grant. It's for $400,000 a year for 3 years. You have to be already a phase 2 recipient to apply, which is what we are. And this drastically reduces the pool of applicants. So we're hoping for a favorable response to this eventually. This money can be used for commercial preparation and not just basic science research, which is what we need right now, because we're pretty far down the road in terms of the research aspect of it. So this is the last couple of slides, and I want to thank everybody for still here hanging with me. I know it's not easy to hear my voice for an hour. My wife certainly doesn't want to hear it that long, and so I appreciate that. So this is sort of our checklist of what we want to accomplish along the way, and we think we've gotten there. And then there's a plan underneath it for where we want to go. We initiated an early animal proof of concept study with very good results, which you saw from the 2-sheet study. We had a pre-submission meeting with the FDA and exploring a de novo strategy. We have one patent that's been granted, 2 of them are pending, and we're in discussions now with Cortec to patent the technology that we've developed over the past year and a half to miniaturize the circuit. So we think there's several patents going to come out of that, and we have some money in the grant that's been set aside for that. And part of that is part of the deal of Cortec getting part of our companies. They have to, do their part in writing the patent. We got a 2-year, $1.5 million NIH SBIR grant. We've submitted a spinal sensor fast track grant. We formed strategic partnerships with outside consultants and advisors, and as well as for the design of our circuits and our piezo generator supply. We've secured an exclusive license from KU for the platform foundational IP. And as you see, we have promising radiographic results pending histologic and biomechanical results from our Colorado State University study, which was much bigger than the original proof of concept and used the miniaturized implant that is close to the one that we think can be implanted into humans. So we want to accelerate our development. And so going forward, we want to accelerate our development, incorporate the sensor technology into the implant. We want to secure and increase our intellectual property. As I mentioned, we're meeting with Cortec this month to plan our strategy for that. We want to improve the quality of manufacturing process. We want to support our regulatory reimbursement strategy. We probably need to recruit another CEO who has fundraising experience and has experience running the next size up company. And we want to enhance the team, the facility in Lawrence. Right now, our facilities, we want to get a clean room. Right now, our facilities are Lisa's lab in Lawrence. We have an address for the corporation in Lawrence in a post office box there, but that's the company sort of exists virtually because Lisa and Ember are in Lawrence. I used to be in Kansas City, but I'm here, and Leighton has moved to Wilmington, North Carolina. But we meet every week to go over all this, and we think, even though it's taken 10 years to get here, we think we have something useful. We're very excited about the future. We need to, firm up some of our plans here and secure some further funding somehow, either through federal dollars or through venture capital. And we've had the ability and the fortune to be able to pitch this. A lot of people in the industry think this is a great idea. At these sponsored Shark Tank like events, we've pitched a couple of times. We've had some favorable responses from some venture capital groups. We met with one of them in New York, and again, that was something else, an eye-opening experience of how much of the company they want, how much money they want to put in, how much they want to take over the company. So there's risks and benefits to all that on both sides. So this is something we're thinking about. And so this is my last slide. This is a synopsis of where we're at. We've been lean and mean for a while. We're going to need to, as I say, we need to grow or die. And so I think we're ready to do that. And so I think I'll stop here. And again, I think this is something that the founders of the medical school had in mind. This is what physicians, scientists, and engineers can do when they get together and collaborate and form, try to solve clinical solutions. This is something that nobody in the group of ours could do alone. And, we're the 4 of us, maybe we're like the Beatles, we're greater than the sum of our parts. And I'm looking to replicate this process in hopefully all the projects they have ongoing at the University of Illinois right now. This is one of the reasons I came back. Once you sort of get this startup bug in your blood system, you can't get rid of it. It's like a virus that keeps growing and makes you want to do more of this. And so this is really exciting, and we're hoping to be able to commercialize this. We've come a long way. A lot of people didn't think we'd get this far, but still we're not over the goal line. We have some more work to do, but I just wanted to share how far we've come and what it takes to get this far, and what they don't teach you in medical school or engineering school along the way in terms of starting a business is what I've gotten an education about over the last 10 years. So I think I'll stop there. I want to thank the university and the medical school and the hospital for all their support and for the innovation team for allowing me to give this grand round. So I think I'll stop here right now and try to answer any questions anybody might have. There are people still in the audience. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Arnold. That was just really exceptional and spot on in terms of the point that the environment really makes a big difference in terms of bringing together the technology, the innovation, and the medicine. And you know, clearly this is something that could impact many patients' lives. And I think that's the vision that we have here. Also, I think going through, as you did, you know, the details in this whole process, it's new to many people, to our students, to our faculty, and there are a lot of details and trials along the way. So thanks for describing those and detailing those. There were a couple questions in the chat. Maybe we can address those first as we get started here. One of them is asking about the changing mechanical properties of the bone itself, like say due to osteoporosis, and how do you account for some of those with this device or in implanting this device?
So this would be difficult to put into patients who have osteoporosis because the potential, the collapse of the bone. We have actually thought about whether we could implant a device or something similar like this into osteoporotic bone to get it to grow itself, not as a fusion, but to get the bone to regenerate. So we've actually started to look at that. But as in terms of the bone, for this to work, the bone around it has to have certain biomechanical properties that would be sort of load bearing to prevent, you know, collapse of the bone. And any surgeon who knows has ever tried to put screws into these patients who have bone like this. It's like putting something into butter; it just doesn't hold. And so this would be, as any bone growth, as any implant would be very difficult to put in patients who have osteoporosis.
I see. Okay. Another question. So since this is really based on mechanical activation, the physical activity level of the patient is going to play a key role in that activation. So how does the patient mobility affect kind of the treatment outcomes or the need for these?
So the goal would be for the patients to be active as much as they can after surgery. It would require people to run a marathon every day to make this work, but it would require people to be active. And you know, you know, we've looked at some of the loading and some of the activity that goes on in the activities of daily life, and people are able to accomplish and achieve that, which they would be in any regular, you know, after any regular spine fusion. We want people to mobilize because a lot of complications happen if the patients don't get moving.
Yeah. So
we think that you know, that in the course of the daily life, this would enhance the ability to fuse. Obviously, the more activity people perform, the more possibly the fusion could occur earlier. And we've actually thought about this problem a little bit more. You know, what if we put this in someone who was immobile? Would it not work? And so we've started to look at whether ultrasonic stimulation at the bedside in patients who are immobile would be equivalent to them, to be equivalent to people walking around. So it's another project that we've thought about, we haven't quite tested yet. So we've clearly want people to get up and move after they've had surgery, just as we would of any kind of spine procedure.
Yeah, I see. Okay. Just another question too, is fibrosis a problem? Do you get this fibrotic capsule around the implant, and does that reduce the ability to electrically stimulate the tissue? And so what's the functional lifetime really of the implant?
Well, the implant really only needs to last long enough for a fusion to occur. Now, typically they last much longer because of you know, the mechanical properties. They theoretically last forever because we don't take them out of patients. We want the bone to grow robustly around them. The cages are load bearing, and so they have to have some structural integrity to allow the fusion to occur. But the bones typically fuse within you know, 3 or 6 months. The outside, you know, usually being 6 months in the lumbar spine. And everybody's got, you know, several people demonstrated in the lab through cyclic loading of these implants, you know, that the implants can last, you know, millions of cycles, much more than the time it would take to achieve fusion. So there are times, you know, we've seen here that up to 50% of the time the patients don't fuse. There is enough bone there, or there's also screws that are put in as well as the implant to prevent the whole thing from collapsing, but the screws will break eventually if a fusion doesn't occur. And that's where a lot of the pain comes in. That's why these procedures need to be revised. And so the goal is to get, if there's some magical wand that you can take to remove the implant and the screws after the fusion took place, it would be great. But there is nothing for that. It would require another open surgical procedure, which no one does anymore.
Yeah.
Or ever did, actually.
I see. Okay. This next question comes from not one of our students. So he's thanking you very much for the presentation and asks, how are you able to balance a successful clinical and surgical practice along with the clinical research, the innovative projects, and the startup? And can you give any specific points of advice to students at their stage of training to prepare for kind of balancing these multifaceted components of their careers?
Yeah, so I'll do my best with that. So my advice to both of my kids is, life is time management. And so you need to figure out a way to do this. And, I don't do this alone. Lisa and particularly Leighton and Ember spend a lot more time on this than I do. But you have to make this a priority, and anything you want to do, make this a priority. And like we have a conference call every Friday. Like we had our regular conference call Friday today, already this morning. And we meet with Cortec every other week. So you have to set aside time when it's convenient for everybody to do this. Now we've been lucky that Lisa's been able to direct this with her graduate students and have other, people do a lot of the I don't want to say the grunt work, but do a lot of the work that's involved in this while, you supervise a lot of the work. Cause I did a lot of this growing up myself. And so that's sort of how science works, right? It's how you can run the IGB and be the dean of LAS at the same time, right? You have to be able to delegate a lot of, your work and make sure you have good people, surround yourself with good people who can get a lot of this done. And you have to set it as a priority and figure out how sort of not to waste time. Now, I'm not perfect at that, but I've gotten better at it in terms of scheduling stuff, early in the, meetings early in the morning or late in the afternoon that I want to go to, or try to, do work between cases. When I was on the editorial board of the Journal of Neurosurgery, we got like 4 or 5 papers a day to review, which I had to do in addition to everything I'm doing right now. So you still have to figure out how to do all that. And so I would say prioritize what you want to do, have a goal and a timeline for when you want to do it, set aside time specifically for that you want to do, and make sure you set aside time to relax so you don't get completely overwhelmed and burdened by it, and come up with a plan. I mean, it can change certainly. I mean, patients get sick or they come in the middle of the night, or plans change during the week and things come up. But if you make stuff that you want to get done a priority, you find ways to do it, I guess.
Yeah. No, good advice. Thank you. Let's open up the mic to the audience for questions. Feel free to unmute yourself and ask if you have any questions or comments. Well, maybe I could start one. I know very often in startup companies, they talk about this valley of death. And it's that period of time when between when a company gets incorporated and to the time that they start generating revenue. And that's usually where a lot of startups kind of fail. So I'm just curious to hear your thoughts as to, what have you done to, in Evoke to kind of avoid that valley of death?
Yeah, so we're in that valley right now, I guess.
Yeah.
Now that you mentioned it, so well, so we put in a bunch of grant proposals, which we are hoping to get successful. And in the business world, the grant proposals are money that's non-dilutive. That is to say, you're getting money without having to give away any part of the company, which is different from venture capital investors who are willing to put some money into the company but want a piece of the company and or control of the company. And so we've pitched this idea, and showed our progress along the way to a lot of companies, and some of the words got out in the spine world. And so we were been invited a couple of times to I had this show this elevator pitch that I showed at the beginning to show this to investors as part of like a Shark Tank, and so and we've gotten not so much money from them, but we've gotten some very good advice, which is almost as good as the money in terms of what to do next. And so we think we're getting close to people wanting to. We've had people approach us, with small amounts, and there are a couple of people who are seriously considering putting big amounts into the company. Now that COVID's over, we're going to be able to make the rounds and show, Medtronic and Stryker and J&J where we're at right now in terms of what we've accomplished since they last saw us. And, it's sort of like, see, your nephew for a long time, and all of a sudden they're bigger, but if they're around every day, you don't notice it. And so we think that we have some, we have a lot, people were sort of scared off when we showed them the proof of concept apparatus, but now that we can show them a cage that looks exactly like the cage they're selling right now, but it might have the potential they can get a premium for and take away market share, then all of a sudden you got their attention. So I think, we're in that phase right now. We would like to get someone else involved in the company who has experience in fundraising, because we're not good at that, and we acknowledge that. And so having someone like that help us. There's some angels in Kansas who want to try to see the company stay as a company in Kansas, in the state, provide jobs, that kind of thing, are interested. And we've had some pretty big time spine venture capitalists look at us, and so we're optimistic that you only have to get rich once, right? We only need someone to bite once, put some money into this, we think, to take us to the next level. And so that's sort of what we're hoping for, and what we have planned. But you're right, if we don't get NIH funding or venture capital funding, all this 10 years of work is going to go down the drain, and we'd be very, very discouraged about that. But we think we're far enough along where someone will be interested in partnering with us, one way or the other.
Yeah, no, that's great, and good luck, at this critical point. The adage I've always heard is, if you go asking for money, you're going to get advice, but if you go ask for advice, they'll give you money. So maybe that's a strategy to take.
Those sound like words of wisdom. Maybe we should do that. I mean, at the last pitch competition where we showed that video that I showed at the beginning, it was like a 3-minute video, but there was like 20 minutes worth of advice, which was very helpful, because all the advice came from venture capitalists, and they told us, made some pointed suggestions about what we ought to do next, and that turned out to be very valuable. So I think I'm going to write that down. I think those are words to live by for our companies.
Hope that helps. Well, there was a comment in the chat from Dan, and Dan, I think you make some good points there. Do you want to maybe unmute and ask that, or maybe explain some of those points a little bit more in detail? If not, I could read from there, but.
Just read it. I'm a little compromised.
Okay, yeah, no problem. So Dan's saying that this isn't a question, but it's an observation for our students. The time frame it takes to make this happen is long, right? Longer than 4 years. Yet we have all the departments, entities, clinical collaboration components all here. So this is why facilitation for the startups and funding should start while the students are in med school, to kind of start that process, and also increases the probability that they stay here and keep the company local, right? Impacting the local economy in a big way. So he just wanted to make that point. Excellent presentation, and thank you, Dr. Arnold, for some of the points.
I think that's an excellent point, right? Don't we have a very good example. We had a kid who was in medical school who I was able to invest in, and he has his bionic arm, right? The guy hasn't gone back to medical school, but the company's flourishing locally in Champaign, right? We wanted to do everything we can to make that an example of what can be done, right?
Yeah.
That's one of the guy's PhD work, and he's doing a great job. And so, that's what we want to build here. If you start here, and then maybe you become a resident here. You and I have talked about part of a group to enhance that ability. That's exactly what we want here. That's the kind of environment, the petri dish that we want to grow here in Champaign.
Yeah. Yeah. So maybe a related question is, from your perspective, are we missing any elements in that entrepreneurial ecosystem here locally that we need to think about?
Yeah, so I've talked to the Illini Ventures people once or twice, and I think it would be, it was mostly around funding, and I think it would be helpful, maybe this is my fault, right? I should go back to them again and ask them for some advice. Maybe they will give me money, but if I ask them for advice and say, look, here's where we are right now, what can we do? And we probably need people that are experts in all these in regulatory areas and in commercialization and supply distribution and all that help people along the way. Because we're fortunate to have some of that, but we sure could have used a lot more of it. And a lot of it came through, my personal connections with other spine surgeons who had companies, and because of my presence in the, the spine world and know people, at all the companies because they do business with us, and we've gotten some advice from them. But I think, it ought to almost be a requirement where you have someone who can advise you or help you along the way, as you get along, as your product matures or you develop it. Because I think, we certainly need some advice now in terms of, how do we raise capital, and should we take this offer? Is this a good offer? We don't know, and we don't, we're not necessarily affiliated with people who do know or could help us make that decision. And this, again, there's multiple landmines along the way that if we step on any one of them could blow us up. And so we don't want that. We don't want all that good work to happen. We don't want to come this far just to come this far. And so I think, I'm gonna, now that I've given this talk and I've had to think about this, I'm gonna sort of reach out to, the Illini Ventures people again, and perhaps show them this talk and say, look, this is where we're at. What do you what do you think? And, how can you help us? And I think that would be having them come, give talks and let the medical school know that and I only knew they existed because I met with them. I insisted on meeting them when I got recruited because I already had this project going, because they have a similar, although not as mature, kind of set up in Kansas. So I knew something like that existed. But perhaps in the first or second week of medical school, during orientation, someone from Illini Ventures should come to the medical school and talk to the students and tell them what's available and what they have to offer locally, and how they can get connected with people in Chicago or with venture capital in Chicago that can help them. So I think that would be useful. And I know that's you can't do everything, right? So not this is one of the things I haven't been able to do. I know I have to get back to you on that paper as well. So that's one of these things there's only 20. Everybody only gets 24 hours in the day, so that's one of the things I haven't been able to do yet. So I have that on my list of things to do.
Very good. Yeah, there was a point or a question in the chat from Jessica that you had mentioned a clean room for your technology. Is that something that we need to have a shared facility for this type, for our ecosystem, right, to have those capabilities?
Yeah, I think that would be useful. I mean, we're going to need that because right now the way we're designing these implants is that Ember is sort of doing every one of them with Cortec, and that's obviously not going to be feasible going forward if you want to produce thousands of these. And obviously, if we get if we bought by a company that already has this manufacturing capability, they would streamline that and do that. But yeah, a clean room would be helpful and try to a shared facility like that would be helpful to be able to standardize the product a little bit further. Because it's right now we're cooking it up in our garage.
Yeah, so many stories about working garages, and it follows that theme. But, all right, any other questions from the audience? Well, I think we will end here. Certainly, thank you again so much, Dr. Arnold, for sharing your story here and the perspectives. I think it's really inspirational for many on the call and this meeting. And I assume too, you would be readily willing to talk with students and faculty about your experiences.
You better believe it. That's why I came back here. Yeah, absolutely. That's what I'm here for.
Wonderful, wonderful. So let that be an open invitation.
We have plenty of medical students who are working with us now. We haven't reached our capacity yet. So if anybody has some ideas or wants to talk with us, we're at the corner of University and Lincoln, the northwest, the northeast east corner of University of Lincoln. And I'm always happy to come to, I love walking around the campus. You know, it was when I was here, the world ended at Green Street when I was a student. And so very gratified to see what's grown between Green Street and University Avenue. It's just been marvelous and very fulfilling for me. And so I get more out of it than probably the students do. And so if you want to talk, my door's always open.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, again,
Thanks for the opportunity.
Sure. And thanks to all those that have joined us today. Wish you all a good day and a good weekend. Take care.